A'ja Wilson held the biggest contract in WNBA history for fewer than 48 hours. She announced it. She made the rounds on social media. 4 MVP awards, 2 Finals MVPs, a championship ring. She framed her 3-year, roughly $5 million supermax with the Las Vegas Aces as the financial crown her career had spent years earning, the natural conclusion to everything she'd built. Then the Indiana Fever placed a call, and before Wilson's announcement had even finished circulating, her record was already obsolete. Aliyah Boston just signed a 4-year, $6.3 million deal with Indiana, the largest contract in WNBA history, executed using a provision buried inside the new collective bargaining agreement that Wilson's deal was never structured to compete with. And here's what the mainstream coverage keeps missing. This moment is not just about Aliyah Boston. It is not even really about A'ja Wilson. Indiana's front office has been quietly assembling the most sophisticated financial architecture the WNBA has ever seen. A deliberate, multi-layer structure that already dethroned one record, retained a full championship-caliber supporting roster, and is positioned to absorb a second record-breaking contract in 2027 when Caitlin Clark becomes Epic eligible. 2 Fever players holding the 2 largest contracts in WNBA history simultaneously on the same roster. At the same time, no franchise has ever pulled that off, and Indiana is 6 months from being on track to do exactly that. If you have been watching what the Fever are building and wondering when the rest of the league catches up, hit that like button right now, because we are mapping every layer of this operation, and it goes much deeper than one contract announcement. EPIC stands for Exceptional Performance on an Initial Contract. It is the most consequential salary mechanism the new CBA introduced, and it dismantled something the old collective bargaining structure had spent decades carefully protecting. Under the previous agreement, young players were locked to their rookie deals regardless of how dominant they became. A player could earn an MVP award in her second season and still spend years waiting for the financial recognition that performance warranted. The old system was a cost control measure, functional for franchise accounting departments, destructive for the players generating the revenue those franchises were built on. The 2020 CBA cracked the ceiling with higher base salaries and improved benefits, but the EPIC provision went further. It created a structural escape route, a documented right to renegotiate into max money early, tied explicitly to on-court performance rather than years of service. The qualifier is not a low bar. A player must earn either a league MVP award or an all-WNBA first or second team selection within her first 3 seasons, while still on her initial contract. That requires genuine, sustained elite performance with a documented timeline. Boston cleared it. She earned an all-WNBA second-team selection in 2025, adding to 3 consecutive All-Star appearances since going #1 overall in the 2023 draft. The moment that window opened, Indiana's front office moved without hesitation. 4 years, $6.3 million, signed and done before Wilson's announcement had finished making the rounds. To understand why the EPIC provision represents such a structural shift, you have to look at what the old system actually cost the players who came before. Breanna Stewart spent the early peak of her career, her first WNBA MVP, her first championship earning salaries that would register as a rounding error on a modern max deal. Diana Taurasi, arguably the greatest player in WNBA history by career metrics, spent decades operating under a salary ceiling that had no meaningful relationship to her actual market value or the revenue her performance generated. Elena Del Dunn, a 2-time MVP, and the most efficient scorer the league had seen at her position, never earned what the open market would have assigned her based on comparable performance. The EPIC provision is the first mechanism that creates a concrete pathway out of that historical pattern, not theoretically, but structurally, with explicit contractual rights attached to measurable performance standards. Boston is the first player to fully exercise it, and the blueprint she just validated is the same one Caitlin Clark is going to follow in 2027. Now examine how Boston's contract is actually structured, because the architecture reveals Indiana's complete strategy. She takes $1 million in 2026. $1 million, intentionally below what she could have commanded in a straight market negotiation, even accounting for the new CBA's parameters. Then her salary climbs to 20% of the cap in each of the following 3 seasons. That structure was not a compromise forced by circumstance. It was a deliberate financial decision with a specific downstream purpose. The gap created in year 1 gave Indiana's front office the cap flexibility to simultaneously lock in Kelsey Mitchell on a $1.4 million supermax of her own. Mitchell is not a complementary piece in Indiana's system. She was the offensive engine that carried the Fever through stretches of the 2025 playoff run, while Clark was sidelined with injury. She repeatedly created the kind of high-percentage scoring opportunities that kept Indiana alive in a series. They had no business competing in on paper. Losing Mitchell to an open market bidding war in her prime would have been a structural collapse at exactly the wrong moment. Boston's willingness to delay her peak earnings by one season prevented that outcome and simultaneously kept the salary flexibility needed to re-sign Lexie Hull and Sophie Cunningham, both of whom chose to return. Hull played through a back injury guarding Jackie Young in the 2025 postseason. Cunningham brings the interior physicality off the bench that Steph White's system specifically requires. Indiana retained both, not despite Boston's contract. Because of how Boston's contract was designed, compare that to what Wilson's situation looks like in Las Vegas. Reports from around the league indicated that multiple Aces players accepted below-market extensions specifically to create the cap space Wilson's supermax required. That model operates on a single-star logic. The highest-paid player anchors everything, and every other salary decision on the roster derives from what is left after honoring her deal. Vegas leaned into that structure because Wilson has been genuinely elite. 4 MVP awards and 2 Finals MVPs create the statistical foundation for that kind of organizational commitment. But single-star financial models carry a structural vulnerability that becomes visible the moment a competitor finds a way to concentrate equal or greater talent at the top of the salary chart without forcing the supporting cast to subsidize it. Indiana found exactly that mechanism. Boston took less in year 1 so Mitchell could get paid. Clark will sign her epic deal into a cap structure that Boston's sacrifice already cleared room for 2 stars. On the same roster, both operating below their immediate individual market ceiling, both within a team-first financial philosophy that translates directly into roster depth. Wilson's $5 million supermax, the deal she announced as her financial crown, now sits third on the all-time WNBA salary list. And the franchise that knocked her off the top is actively building toward claiming spots 1 and 2 simultaneously. Before the contracts, before the salary records, there was a basketball series that set the conditions for everything that followed. The 2025 WNBA semifinals put Boston and Wilson in direct competition at exactly the moment both franchises were drawing their long-term blueprints. Indiana entered that series shorthanded, missing 6 players, including Caitlin Clark, facing a Las Vegas roster built specifically for deep playoff runs with Wilson at full strength and home court advantage in their building. On paper, it looked like a Vegas coronation. Boston never received that memo. She walked into Wilson's building and methodically dismantled the interior structure Vegas had constructed around their franchise player. Not in highlight reel flashes, but in sustained structural dominance, repeatedly creating scoring opportunities out of situations where Wilson's positioning should have ended the play cleanly. Indiana pushed that series in ways that genuinely shocked the league, and Boston's on-court performance across those games became the documented evidence that sealed her epic eligibility. She did not just qualify on paper, she qualified by taking apart the player whose contract record she was about to replace. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Indiana's front office is the most underrated operation in professional basketball right now? Because the structure Amber Cox has assembled here is unlike anything this league has previously seen, and most of the coverage is still treating this like a single contract story rather than a multi-year strategic execution. When the Boston signing became official, Caitlin Clark posted 2 words on social media. Absolutely, congrats AB. Boston replied, God is great, let's go. No calculated PR statements, no framing through an agent, no long structured acknowledgement timed for maximum engagement, 2 franchise players communicating in the direct language of people who already know what they are building together and who understand exactly what this contract means for the roster they are both committed to. That exchange is a cultural signal that front offices spend years trying to manufacture and almost never achieve organically. Boston voluntarily delayed her maximum earning potential in year 1 to keep the players around her whole. Clark's immediate public celebration of that choice tells you everything about the alignment inside that locker room. In franchise sports, the relationship between star players and the financial decisions that affect their teammates is one of the most reliable predictors of whether a championship window actually gets opened or quietly closes while everyone waits for circumstances to improve. The financial architecture Indiana has constructed goes beyond Boston's contract in ways that are just beginning to become clear. Amber Cox structured the Fever's salary commitments around a deliberate 3-year runway, a window that begins with Boston and Mitchell locked in as the defensive and offensive anchors, runs through Clark's continued development within Steph White's system, and culminates in 2027 with Clark's epic eligibility opening. The cap flexibility Boston's year 1 discount created is not just about retaining the current roster, it is about having the room to absorb a second epic contract without dismantling anything that makes the first one work. That requires genuine long-term financial planning across multiple CBA cycles, Not reactive salary decisions made to solve immediate problems, but proactive architecture built around a specific target outcome. Real quick, if this kind of structural analysis is what keeps you coming back to this channel, consider joining as a member. Your support is exactly what makes it possible for us to go this deep on the stories that are genuinely reshaping this league, while everyone else is still arguing about the surface-level narrative. Indiana's financial structure is not operating in isolation from the basketball decisions Steph White is making on the floor. White coaches pace, interior defense, and ball movement, a system built around specific principles that do something rare when applied to two high-usage stars. It multiplies what both players produce, rather than creating competition for touches or shot opportunities. Boston's postgame and Clark's shooting and playmaking operate in genuinely complementary lanes within this scheme. Boston's playmaking is her ability to read defensive rotations and find the open player out of double teams, is precisely what creates the kind of open looks Clark's shooting percentage depends on, and Clark's gravity as a shooter. The defensive attention she commands from 35 feet out is exactly what creates the interior space Boston needs to operate at full efficiency. The 2026 playoff run demonstrated that this system works against elite competition even while the core is still developing. Clark, fully integrated into that structure with a healthy roster around her, is a genuinely different problem for opposing defenses than anything Indiana has presented so far. If you have not sent this video to someone in your circle who is still sleeping on what Indiana is building, do it right now, because the window to understand this before it becomes obvious to everyone is closing. Subscribe if you have not yet, and share this one. A'ja Wilson has spent considerable time and public energy positioning herself as the face of the WNBA. By raw performance metrics, her argument carries weight. 4 MVP awards, 2 Finals MVPs, a championship, and a sustained level of elite individual production that few players in league history can match across the same time frame. But the way Wilson has chosen to deploy her public platform over the past 2 seasons has created a documented track record that now follows her into every major commercial conversation. Her extended public commentary on Caitlin Clark, the framing around race and recognition, the claims about being overlooked, despite historic individual success, generated the kind of sustained controversy that any marketing team is reviewing before committing to a long-term sponsorship deal. Brands evaluating a multi-year investment are not just assessing athletic performance, they are evaluating audience response, public positioning, and whether the association creates noise that complicates their own marketing environment. Forbes listed Clark as one of the most powerful women in sports. Clark's Nike signature line, her time recognition, her endorsement portfolio, her speaking fees, they all trace to a single source, measurable, documented commercial reach at a scale the women's sports market had not previously seen. Wilson has repeatedly framed Clark's commercial ceiling as a commentary on Wilson's own relative recognition. Every time that framing appears publicly, it provides precisely the kind of documented evidence that sponsors conducting due diligence use to evaluate whether a partnership is worth the association. That calculation is not about fairness in the abstract. It is about brand risk assessment, and Wilson keeps answering the question those brands are quietly asking. Here is where Indiana's blueprint reaches its logical conclusion. Clark becomes Epic eligible in 2027. She will need either a league MVP or an All-NBA first or second team selection within her first 3 seasons, a threshold that, given her trajectory, her commercial profile, and the system she is operating in, appears structurally within reach. Every indicator points to a contract that matches or exceeds Boston's $6.3 million deal. When that contract is signed, the Indiana Fever will simultaneously hold the 2 largest contracts in WNBA history on the same roster. That has never been done. Not once across the league's entire history, and Amber Cox's front office is positioned to absorb Clark's contract without dismantling a single meaningful piece of what makes Indiana dangerous, because Boston already took the short-term discount that created the necessary room. The financial architecture was built backward from that outcome. Boston's year-1 discount, Mitchell's retention, Hull and Cunningham re-signing at terms the roster could accommodate. Every move pointing toward a 2027 moment where Indiana has 2 epic contracts, a championship-tested core, and a multi-year runway to build title runs around it. Las Vegas built their model around Wilson's maximum salary and the players around her accepting less to make the numbers functional. That model produced championships because Wilson was elite enough to justify the structure, but it does not scale the way Indiana's model scales, because it depends on one player performing at her absolute ceiling every season, while the roster around her accepts financial constraints that compound over time. Wilson's 3-year, $5 million deal, the contract she announced as her financial crown, currently sits 3rd on the all-time WNBA salary list. Boston knocked her off the top. Clark has not signed anything yet. The power structure of this league shifted inside 1 week. Wilson spent years as the loudest voice and the highest paid player simultaneously. Both of those things stopped being true before most people realized the change had already happened. The question Indiana's front office is now answering is not whether Clark's 2027 contract makes history. That projection is built on documented financial structure, established epic precedent, and a commercial profile that grows every quarter. The question is what happens to every franchise in this league that is still operating under assumptions the epic provision made obsolete, still building salary structures around single-star logic, while Indiana quietly assembles the first dual epic roster in WNBA history and positions it inside a coaching system designed to make both contracts worth more than their face value. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button right now and turn on all notifications, because when Clark's epic eligibility opens in 2027, we are going to break down every detail the moment it becomes available. We will see you in the next one.